Welcome to the course, A Brief History of Humankind. As its name indicates, this course attempts to offer you a complete overview of the whole of human history, from the appearance of humankind in East Africa about 2.5 million years ago, up to the technological and political revolutions of the 21st century, which may well lead to the disappearance of humankind. At the end of the course, I hope that you will have not only a clear general picture of human history, but also that you will have some clear answers to basic questions of history, such as what is religion, what is an empire, what is money, how does a capitalist economy function, why were men superior to women in almost all known human societies, did people become happier as history unfolded, and what is the likely future of humankind in the 21st century and beyond? This sounds very ambitious, and I promise you that it will be very superficial and very controversial. It will be superficial because history is very, very complex, and any attempt to give a complete account of the whole of history, especially in just 20 lessons, is bound to ignore many of the subtleties and many of the details. My aim is that you will nevertheless leave this course after 20 lessons with a complete picture of history in mind, even if that picture is somewhat like a caricature. If you wish, you could later fill up the details by attending other courses or reading more books. The story I will tell here is not only superficial, but also controversial. It represents the way that I personally understand history, and not the way that all historians understand history, for there is simply no objective story that all historians in all the history departments in the world accept as the truth. If you asked 10 different historians to give this course, you will get 10 very, very different histories of the world and of humanity. So I hope that as you listen to these lectures, you don't take them simply as the truth about humankind and about its past, but more as an invitation to think about history and explore it for yourself. Before we begin the story of humankind, I would like to cover a few technical details about this course. Each lecture will be broken into several segments. It is best if you watch the entire lecture in one go, but if you find this too much, if you find the lecture too long, then you're always free to stop after a segment or two segments and continue listening to the next segment of the lesson in an hour, in a few hours, or a few days. Even if you watch the entire lecture in one go, it might still be a good idea to stop for a few minutes after each segment and reflect and think about what you have heard. Since this is an introductory course to history, I don't assume any prior knowledge on your part of history. Even if you've never studied history in college or even in school, it should be very easy for you to join this course and to follow the lectures and to understand almost everything I speak about. And also, you don't need to read any books while taking this course in order to follow the lecture. Now, a book is being prepared to accompany this particular course. The German version of the book, titled Eine kurze Geschichte der Menschheit, will be published in October 2013. The English version and versions in many other languages, like Spanish and French and Chinese and so forth, will appear only towards the summer or fall of 2014. The book will cover basically the same issues as this course, but in greater depth. However, I want to emphasize that it is absolutely not essential to read this book during the course or after the course. You can follow the course and understand everything and gain a very good understanding of the course of human history without reading the accompanying book. Likewise, you don't need to do any assignments in order to join and to follow the course. The only real assignment that you have as the students is to think about what you hear As I noted earlier, much of what I'm going to say is controversial. The course is going to challenge many widespread views about history, about humankind, about politics, economics, religion, and so forth. So I hope that you will take up this challenge and think about the issues being raised and discuss them with friends and family members and so forth. For those who like examinations, there will be an exam at the end of the course, so you can test your knowledge and understanding of history. But this too, it's not a requirement. If you don't like exams, feel completely free to ignore it and not to take it. Having covered these technical issues, we can now begin to tell the story of humankind. About 13 billion years ago, matter, energy, time, and space came into being in what is known as the Big Bang. The story of these fundamental features of our universe is called physics. Physics examines how matter, energy, time, and space interact with one another and behave. About 300,000 years after their appearance, matter and energy started to combine into complex structures, which we call atoms. And these atoms then combined into even more complex structures, which are called molecules. The story of atoms, molecules, and their interactions is called chemistry. Chemistry examines what happens when an oxygen atom comes into contact with a hydrogen atom, or when a salt molecule comes into contact with a water molecule. This is what chemistry does. About 4 billion years ago, on a planet called Earth, certain molecules combined to form even larger and more complex structures, which we call organisms, or living creatures. The story of organisms is biology. Biology examines how, for example, a lion or a giraffe function, and what happens when a lion comes into contact with a giraffe. This is biology. About 70,000 years ago, organisms belonging to a very particular species, our species, Homo sapiens, started to come together and combine and form even more elaborate structures, which we call cultures. The development of these human cultures is a history. This is what this course will be about, the formation and development and interaction of human cultures from about 70,000 years ago until today. From this perspective, what is essential to realize is that there is no unbridgeable gap between history on the one side and physics, chemistry, and biology on the other side. History is simply the next stage in the process of ongoing complexity in the universe. We have physical dynamics, and then they become more and more complex. We have chemistry, chemical dynamics, and then chemical dynamics become more and more complex. We have biology, biological dynamics, and when biology becomes very, very complex, then we get history. Now, three very important things happened in history. You can summarize the whole of history in just three main revolutions, or three main events. The first is the cognitive revolution. The cognitive revolution began about 70,000 years ago. In this revolution, Homo sapiens, which previously was just an insignificant species of African ape, evolved unique cognitive abilities. Cognitive abilities means thinking, remembering, communicating, learning. These are the cognitive abilities. So Homo sapiens developed unique cognitive abilities that gave it immense power and turned it into the most important animal in the world. So this is the first big revolution of history, the cognitive revolution. The second big revolution of history is the agricultural revolution, and it began about 12,000 years ago. During the agricultural revolution, Homo sapiens domesticated certain kinds of animals and plants, established villages and cities and other permanent settlements, and began to create ever more complex societies, cities and kingdoms and empires and churches and so forth. So this is the second big revolution of history, the agricultural revolution. The third big revolution of history is the scientific revolution. It began about 500 years ago. And during the scientific revolution, Homo sapiens understood better and better the rules that govern the natural world around it and inside it, and thereby gained more and more power and became the master of the entire planet. It has become so powerful that today it actually begins to change the most basic rules of life. For about 4 billion years, life on Earth evolved according to the rules of natural selection, evolution by natural selection, and today Homo sapiens is gaining so much power thanks to technologies like genetic engineering and direct brain-computer interfaces and so forth, that it is expected that in the next century or two, it will really completely change the way that life evolves on planet Earth and in the universe in general. We will come to speak about this in greater depth at the end of the course, when we will discuss the revolutions, the technological and political changes of the 20th and 21st century. What we will do in this course is to survey these three fundamental revolutions of history, the cognitive revolution, the agricultural revolution, and the scientific revolution, and we'll examine what was their impact, both upon human beings and upon their fellow organisms and the environment around them. Now, it's very important to realize that humans existed long before history. History began with the cognitive revolution about 70,000 years ago, but animals, much like you and me, much like modern humans, first appeared about 2.5 billion years ago in East Africa. However, for most of these 2.5 million years, our ancestors, our human ancestors, were just another kind of animal. There was nothing special about humans. There was no hint that their great-great-great-grandchildren would one day walk on the moon, or split the atom, or understand DNA, or write history books. The most important thing to know about prehistoric humans it is that they were unimportant creatures. They did not have more impact upon the world than, say, gorillas, or fireflies, or penguins. The history of ancient humans was just another chapter in the big book of biology. Now, biologists classify animals into species. Animals are said to belong to the same species if they tend to have sex with one another, to mate with one another, giving birth to fertile offspring. Horses and donkeys, for example, they look quite similar, and they are indeed very similar in many of their qualities, but horses and donkeys usually have little sexual interest one in the other. People sometimes force horses and donkeys to mate, and then they even can produce offspring. But their offspring, which are called mules, are always sterile. This shows that horses and donkeys, despite all the similarities between them, are in fact two completely different species. Since they cannot exchange genes between them, they are evolving over the generation in different directions. When there is some important genetic mutation in a horse, it can never pass to donkeys because they can't produce fertile offspring together. So this is why they are separate, different species. In contrast, a bulldog and a cocker spaniel may look very different from one another, but they will happily mate. They have a lot of sexual interest one in the other, and when they mate, they can produce fertile puppies that will grow up to mate with other dogs and produce more puppies and so forth and so on. So this is why bulldogs and spaniels are considered members of the same species. They are both dogs. Now, species that evolved from a common ancestor, even when they are different from one another, like horses and donkeys, still, similar species that evolved from a common ancestor are bunched together by biologists under the heading, under the title, genus. This is how scientists called a group of species that evolved from a common ancestor. They call it genus. The plural of genus is genera. For example, lions, tigers, leopards, and jaguars are different species within the genus Panthera. It's important to know that scientists usually like to use the Latin language in order to name things because everything sounds far more impressive and scientific when you say it in Latin. So, for example, all the medicines we use, all the names of the muscles in our bodies, they are all in Latin. Also, the names of animals, biologists and plants, and all other organisms, biologists like to use Latin to give animals their scientific name. And the rule is that the scientific name of each animal has two parts. First, the genus, and then the species. Lions, for example, the scientific name of the lion is not lion. When you write in scientific articles about lions, you don't speak about lions. You speak about Panthera leo. This is the scientific name of the lion. Panthera is the name of the genus, it comes first, and then Leo, this is the name of the species, it comes second, so lion is Panthera leo. You and me, and I guess everybody who watches this video, we are all Homo sapiens. This is the scientific name of our species, Homo sapiens, which means the species sapiens, a Latin word meaning wise, of the genus Homo, a Latin word meaning man. So the meaning of our scientific name, Homo sapiens, is wise men. This is the name that we gave ourselves. We might be very wise, but we are not particularly modest. Genera, so this is genus and genera. Genera is the plural of the word genus. It's quite complicated. Genera, in their turn, are also grouped by biologists into larger collectives, which are known as families. So we have in nature, for example, the cat family, which includes many, many genera and species of cats. Like all the lions and cheetahs and house cats, they all belong to the cat family. And we have the dog family, which includes not only dogs, but all kinds of wolves and foxes and jackals. They all belong to the big family, the dog family. And we have the elephant family, which includes Indian elephants and African elephants and extinct species of elephants like mammoth and mastodons. What is important to know is that all members of a family trace their lineage back to some ancient ancestor who is the great-great-great-grandmother or grandfather of all of them. All the cats, for example, from the most ferocious lion in the African savannah to the smallest, cutest house kitten in your house, they all have the same great-great-great ancestor who lived about 25 million years ago. So these are families. Homo sapiens too, our species, belongs to a family, a biological family. This banal fact used to be one of the most closely guarded secrets of history. For thousands of years, Homo sapiens preferred to view itself as totally different from all the other animals, as set apart from all the other animals, as a kind of orphan, which has no family, no cousins, no siblings, and most importantly, no parents. As if Homo sapiens just popped up on Earth without having any evolutionary ancestors. But that is just not the case. Whether you like it or not, the truth is that we, the species Homo sapiens, are also members of a large and particularly noisy family called the family of great apes. Just as lions and cheetahs, they belong to the family of cats, so we Homo sapiens have a family called the great apes. There are some other members of this family which are still living today in the world. Our closest cousins, our closest relatives which are still alive include the chimpanzees, the gorillas, and the orangutans. Of these, the chimpanzees are the closest to us. Just 6 million years ago, if you went back in time 6 million years, you would find somewhere in Africa a single female ape who had 2 daughters. One of her daughters became the ancestor of all the chimpanzees, and her sister, the other daughter, she's yours and mine, great-great-great-great-grandmother. So Homo sapiens belongs to a family. Homo sapiens has kept hidden an even more disturbing secret. We have not only a big family with many cousins, once upon a time we also had quite a few brothers and sisters. We, that is Homo sapiens, we tend to call ourselves not Homo sapiens. Usually when we speak about ourselves, we use the title human, as if only us are human. We are the only humans. But the fact is that there used to be many other human species on planet Earth. Humans simply means animals that belong to the genus Homo, that is man in Latin. So these humans, they first appeared in East Africa about 2.5 million years ago. They did not appear out of nowhere. They evolved from an earlier genus of apes, which is called Australopithecus. It has nothing to do with Australia, this complicated name. It simply means southern ape. So Australopithecus was the ancient ancestor of humans. The first human species evolved from Australopithecus somewhere in East Africa about 2.5 million years ago. At first, it was the only human species, but about 2 million years ago, some of these archaic men and women left their homeland in East Africa and spread around the world, settling various areas in North Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. And in each area, these men and women encountered different conditions, a different climate, different geography, animals and plants. And in order to adapt to these different conditions, the human populations in each of those areas began to evolve in different ways. And this created, with time, completely different human species. For example, humans who, after leaving Africa, reached Northern Europe, they needed to adapt to the very cold climate of Northern Europe with lots of ice and snow and all kinds of big animals like bears and mammoths and mastodons. Other humans, after leaving Africa, they eventually ended up in Indonesia, and they needed to adapt to the very hot tropical climate of the jungles and swamps of Indonesia. Other humans, meanwhile, reached Central Asia, the deserts of Central Asia, and they needed to adapt to the very dry climates of Central Asia. The result was that over the years, many, many different species of humans evolved in different parts of the world, and to each of these different human species, scientists have assigned its own pompous Latin name. Now, you don't need to remember the names of the different species and the details that I'm going to tell about the different species, but I would like to take a few minutes to tell you about some of these ancient brothers and sisters of ours, some of these ancient human species, so that you will know our family a little better. In Europe and the Middle East evolved a species of humans which scientists call Homo neanderthaliensis. This means in Latin, men from the Neander Valley. The name was given because the first remains of these ancient humans were discovered by archaeologists in the Neander Valley in Germany, so they call this species men from the Neander Valley, Homo neanderthaliensis. But they also gave these humans a nickname, which everybody uses, and I will also use. They are the Neanderthals. Neanderthals were well adapted to the cold climate of Ice Age Europe and the Middle East. Even the Middle East was at that time much colder than it is today. Neanderthals were bigger, more muscular than us. They had insulating layers of fat covering their bodies to give them better protection from the cold. And they even had bigger brains that we have. So this was one human species that evolved in Europe and the Middle East. In another part of the world, on the island of Java in Indonesia, evolved Homo soloensis. This means, in Latin again, men from the Solo Valley, because the first remains of these human species were discovered by archaeologists in the Solo Valley on Java Island. And Java had tropical climate, so Homo soloensis was evolving over the years to become better and better adapted to living in the jungles and swamps of tropical Java. On another Indonesian island, the very small island of Flores evolved a very unique and interesting human species, which is called by scientists Homo floresiensis. This means, you probably can now guess it by yourself, men from Flores Island, because this is where this species lived, on Flores Island. Now, the unique thing about these humans, about Homo floresiensis, is that they were dwarfs. They were very, very small. What happened is that Flores used to be connected to the mainland by land. And at some time, the sea levels rose, the ocean rose, and Flores was disconnected from the mainland. And some people who walked over the land to Flores, they got stuck on this island when the sea level rose. And Flores is a small island, and there is not much to eat on such a small island. So the big people died first. The big people needed a lot of food in order to survive, so they died first. And smaller people who need less food in order to survive, they managed to survive better. And this happened generation after generation. The smallest people had the best chances of having enough food and keeping themselves alive. So over the years, the people who got stuck on Flores Island became smaller and smaller and smaller, until they became dwarfs. And it's estimated, according to the bones that scientists have found, that Homo floresiensis reached a maximum height of no more than 1 meter and a maximum weight of 25 kilograms. Nevertheless, these tiny people, they still were humans. They are still able to manufacture and use all kinds of tools, like spears and so forth. They even managed, at least from time to time, to hunt elephants. Now, it wasn't very big elephants. It was also dwarf elephants, because also elephants that got stuck on Flores Island, the same thing that happened to humans happened also to the elephants. And then it became smaller and smaller and smaller until Flores was populated by tiny people hunting tiny elephants. So this is Flores. While this was happening in the tiny island of Flores, in the big open spaces of Asia, evolved a different human species, which is called by scientists Homo erectus. Homo erectus means upright men, because these men, these people, were very tall. They were taller than us, reaching heights of 1.8 and even 1.9 meters tall. Another important fact about Homo erectus is that it was probably the most successful human species ever in terms of how many years it managed to survive. Homo erectus first evolved about 1.5 million years ago, and survived until about 50,000 years ago. So Homo erectus existed, this species existed for close to 1.5 million years. In contrast, our species, Homo sapiens, began to evolve maybe 300,000, 200,000 years ago. We exist only about 200,000-300,000 years. And it is very unlikely that we will break the record of Homo erectus. It's very unlikely that our species will manage to live for more than 1.5 million years. In fact, as we will see in the last lesson of this course, which we'll discuss in the future, it is doubtful if we will manage to exist even for 1,000 years, so what to speak about 1.5 million years. So this is Homo erectus. In 2010, scientists discovered the remains of another lost brother or lost sister when they excavated the Denisova cave in Russia, in eastern Russia. So archaeologists excavating the cave, they made an amazing discovery. They found there a finger, or not a finger, they found the fossilized bone of a human finger. And they managed to extract DNA from this fossilized bone and to map it, to see what kind of DNA was inside. And they compared the DNA from the finger of the Denisova cave to the DNA of all other known human species, and it didn't match. So they came to the conclusion, based just on this single finger, that previously there existed, at least in Central Asia, another species of humans, which they now called Homo Denisova, men from the Denisova cave, which was different from the Neanderthals and Homo erectus and all the rest. So this is Homo Denisova. Who knows how many other ancient human species existed in the past and are waiting to be discovered in all kinds of caves and remote islands? We don't know for sure. While all this was happening in Europe and Asia, evolution in East Africa, where humans first emerged, did not stop. Evolution continued, natural selection continued to put pressure on humans in East Africa, which resulted in the evolution of more and more human species also in Africa. We have, for example, Homo rudolfensis, men from Lake Rudolph, whose remains were found near Lake Rudolph. We have Homo ergaster, which means working men, because archaeologists discovered alongside the bones of this species also many tools made by these ancient humans, so they called them working men, as if they just went around making tools, stone tools all the time. And eventually, our own species, Homo sapiens, also appeared in East Africa about 200,000 or 300,000 years ago. You don't need to remember the names and details, as I said, of all these different human species. What is important, however, is to realize how they are related to one another, or the general picture. This is more correct. What is important is to understand the general picture of the human family. And the general picture of the human family is that there are many human species and not just one. Some of these species were massive, very big, like Homo erectus and the Neanderthals. Others were dwarfs, like Homo floresiensis. Some human species were fearsome hunters, subsisting mainly by hunting animals. Other human species lived mainly by gathering plants. They are vegetarians. Some human species lived on a single island, like Flores Island or Java Island. Other human species roamed over entire continents, like Homo erectus or Homo denisova. But all of these different human species belong to the genus Homo. They are all human beings. They are all part of the human family. Now, many people have heard that once upon a time there were all kinds of human species on planet Earth. However, we often tend mistakenly to arrange these different human species in a straight line of descent, as if we have Homo ergaster that slowly evolved into Homo erectus, and then Homo erectus slowly evolved into the Neanderthals, and the Neanderthals evolved into us. According to this linear model of human evolution, at any particular moment in time, there was only one type of human species inhabiting planet Earth, and all previous species of humans were just older models of ourselves. They evolved eventually to become us. But the truth is different. The truth is that from about 2 million years ago until about 10,000 years ago, the world was home at one and the same time to several human species simultaneously. And why not? Today, there are many different species of pigs in the world. There are many different species of foxes. There are many different species of bears. Like you have grizzly bears, and you have Arctic bears, and you have brown bears, and you have black bears, all living together at the same time on planet Earth. So 100,000 years ago, there were at least 6 different species of humans living side by side on planet Earth. We know for sure about 6. There might have been many more. And this should not surprise us, that in different parts of the world, there were different human species at the same time. What is surprising, what is strange, is the current situation, that in all the world, there is just one human species, our species. You go to Europe, you go to India, you go to China, you go to Australia, you go to America. Everywhere you encounter just one species, our species, Homo sapiens. This is very strange, and actually it's a bit suspicious. As we shall shortly see in the next segments of this lesson, Homo sapiens has pretty good reasons to hide the fact, to forget the fact that it once had brothers and sisters, because there is some evidence that we, Homo sapiens, had a hand in the disappearance of all the other human species. What exactly happened to the other human species, and what we, Homo sapiens, may have done to them, will be discussed in the next segment of this lesson. In the previous segment, we saw that there were once many different species of humans on planet Earth. There are differences between these human species, but there are also similarities. They all belonged, after all, to the same genus, the genus Homo. Now, all human species, both the big ones and the small Homo erectus and the Neanderthals, they all shared several defining characteristics that make them all humans. The first defining characteristic of all human species is that they all had extraordinarily large brains. When you compare them to other animals, mammals weighing 60 kilograms usually have a brain. The size of the brain is usually about 200 cubic centimeters. In contrast, Homo sapiens, weighing 60 kilos, have a brain averaging between 1,200 and 1,400 cubic centimeters. The brain, this is Homo sapiens today. The brains of earlier humans were smaller, but even the brain of the earliest men and women in East Africa about 2.5 million years ago, it was still very large compared, say, to the brain of a tiger of an equal weight, or of a pig of an equal weight. This disproportion of a very big brain compared to body size only increased as humans evolved. Now, the fact that humans evolved larger and larger and larger brains may seem to us obvious. We are so proud of our big brains that we tend to assume that when it comes to brains, more is always better. But if this was the case, then evolutionary pressures should have produced not only humans with very big brains, but also cats with big brains, and dogs with big brains, and birds with big brains, and so forth. And this did not happen. The fact is that a big brain, aside from its advantages, is also a very big problem. First of all, you have to carry it around. It doesn't help you if you have a brain and you leave it at home. So you have to carry it around with you all the time, and you have to protect it. So it usually is encased within a massive skull with all these bones protecting the brain. And it's hard to carry around, it's burdensome to the body to carry around this big head with the big brain inside it. What is even more hard is to fuel the brain with energy. In Homo sapiens, in us, the brain accounts for about 2 or 3% of total body weight, but it consumes 25% of the body's energy when the body is at rest, not running after a giraffe or something. By comparison, the brains of other apes, like chimpanzees or gorillas, they require only 8% of the energy of the body. And even apes have relatively very large brains. So the big problem with the brain, aside from carrying it around, is how to fuel it with energy. Ancient humans paid for their larger and larger brains in two main ways. First of all, they had to spend more time looking for food. Whereas a baboon with a smaller brain doesn't need so much food, so it sits around in the sun doing nothing much of the day, a human with this big brain all the time have to go around looking for food to eat something so that there will be energy to fuel the brain. So this is one way that humans paid for the brain. A second method for paying the energy budget of the brain is that humans became, as the brain got bigger, humans became less muscular. The muscles became smaller and weaker. This is a little like a government which deflects money, which moves money from the defense budget to the education budget. So humans began to moving energy from muscles to brains, from biceps to neurons. Less muscles, so the muscles don't need much energy. You can divert this energy to fuel your brains. Now, this idea of giving up on muscle in order to have a bigger brain it's far from obvious that this is a good idea, that this is a good strategy for survival in the savannah. A chimpanzee, for example, cannot win an argument with Homo sapiens, but a chimpanzee can rip apart a human being as if it was a rag doll. A chimpanzee that weighs 60 kilograms is estimated to be at least 5 times stronger than a human being weighing an equal weight of 60 kilograms. So this giving up on muscles in exchange for a brain, it wasn't necessarily such a great idea, such a good deal. Now today, this deal sounds very advantageous to us because our big brains really pay off. Thanks to our big brains, we have cars and we have guns, so we can drive much faster than a chimpanzee, and we can shoot the chimpanzee from afar, so we are much more powerful. But this is only today. If you go back 2 million years ago, there is very little that human beings got from their big brains. Their brains kept growing and growing, but apart from some flint knives and pointed sticks, humans had very little to show for their big brains. Honestly speaking, the evolution of the human brain, why it became so big, is one of the greatest mysteries in evolution. We don't really know what drove the growth of the human brains over hundreds of thousands of years in which it didn't seem to be doing anything special. It's very important in general in science that if you have a very important question and you don't know the answer to this question, then just be honest about it. Just say, we don't know, I don't know. So this is the case with the big brain. It's very important to know why the brain of our ancestors got bigger and bigger, but we don't really have a good answer to this question. So this is the first quality common to all humans, big brains. Another quality, which is common to all human species, Neanderthals, Homo erectus, us, Homo floresiensis, is that all of us humans walk upright on two legs. We don't walk on all fours, like most of the other mammals. It's easier to explain the advantages of walking upright than the advantages of the big brains. When you stand up, when you walk on only two legs and you stand up, it's much easier to scan the savannah in search of prey or in search of enemies and predators like lions and elephants. You can see them from much further away. Moreover, once your hands are freed from you don't need your hands in order to walk. You don't have to walk on all fours. You walk only on two legs and the hands are free. You can use your hands for many other new purposes, like signaling your friends, I'm here, or like throwing stones and throwing sticks. So this is another big advantage of walking upright, that the hands are free. And once the hands became free from walking, humans over generation evolved an increasing concentrations of nerves and finally small, finely tuned muscles in their palms and in their fingers, which enables humans to perform very complicated, very delicate tasks with their hands, like, for example, producing tools and using tools, stone tools and sticks and spears and things like that. The first evidence we have for humans producing and using tools dates back to about 2.5 million years ago in East Africa. And from that, this is actually the first sign that we are dealing here with humans. The manufacture and use of tools is a defining characteristic by which archaeologists recognize ancient humans. So these are the big advantages of walking upright, that you can see farther away, that you can have free hands, and then you can start making and using tools. However, everything in evolution comes with a cost. Nothing is for free. And walking upright also has its downside. The first problem with walking upright is that the skeleton of our primate ancestors evolved for millions upon millions of years to support a creature that walked on all fours and had also a relatively small head and small brain. Now, when humans moved to walking upright on just two legs, and simultaneously they had bigger brains and bigger heads, this created very big stress on the spine and on the skeleton and on the muscles in general. Because again, when you take a creature that walks on all four and suddenly the skeleton and the muscles have to adjust to walking just on two legs and to support this big weight on top of the head, this creates a lot of problems. So the skeleton and the muscles, they over the generations evolved to do it better, but it was never perfect. And even today, people still suffer a lot from backaches and from stiff necks and from all kinds of other problems in the skeleton and in the muscular system, which result from moving to an upright position. So this is one thing that humans paid for walking upright. Women paid extra. Women had to pay something more for walking upright on two legs than men did. Walking upright, one of the things that happens when you walk upright is that your hips have to be relatively narrow and close to one another. In women, this also means that the birth canal must be narrow. The birth canal is this passage through which the baby is born. And this created a huge problem because at roughly the same period, women had to give birth to babies through a narrow birth canal at the same time that the brains and the head of the babies became bigger. So this was a very big problem in human evolution, how to give birth to babies with big heads through a narrower and narrower birth canal. This was a big problem, and one of the outcomes was that women and children began to die during childbirth more and more. Death in childbirth of both the babies and the mothers became far more common among humans than among chimpanzees or baboons or zebras or elephants. Again, because they had to manage these two things together at the same time, to walk upright, so you have a narrow birth canal, and to have a big brain, so the baby has a large head that has to fit through the narrow birth canal. What was the solution to this problem? So the solution to this problem was to give birth to babies earlier and earlier, when they are still small, and especially when their head and brains are still very small and supple. Obviously, it wasn't a conscious solution. It's not like 2 million years ago, men and women came together in a big conference, a big meeting, and scratched their head and said, okay, how do we solve this? And somebody said, let's give birth earlier, and this is what they did. Obviously, it wasn't like this. The solution was given simply by natural selection. Women that gave birth relatively late, they had a greater chance of dying in childbirth, and so they had a smaller chance of their genes moving to the next generation. Women that gave birth earlier, when the child was still undeveloped, rather small, with a small head, they had a better chance of surviving and passing on their genes to the next generation. So over time, the pregnancy period of women became shorter and shorter, and women began to give birth earlier and earlier. And even today, women give birth to human babies much earlier, comparatively, than any other animal. Humans, so to speak, are born prematurely, when they are only half-baked. Like you take the cake from the oven, when it is still only half-baked, it's not ready yet. This is how humans emerge from the womb, when many of the vital systems, especially in the brain, are still not developed or still underdeveloped. When you compare in this respect humans to other animals, you see there's a big difference. A small horse, a colt, can start walking and trotting very shortly after birth. Within hours of being born, a small horse can start walking. If you have cats at home, you may know that a kitten can leave its mother and start walking around by itself, looking for food and playing with other cats when it is only a few weeks old. Human babies, on the other hand, remain helpless and completely dependent upon their elders for many months and even years. It takes years for a human baby to catch up with what baby horses and baby kittens can do. So this was the solution, the evolutionary solution, how to walk upright with big heads. The solution was to give birth to babies earlier when they are underdeveloped. And this had immense importance for the future of humankind and for our societies today, due to several reasons. First of all, because human children are born prematurely, they need a lot of care and attention from their elders, from their parents and siblings and so forth, in order to survive and grow up. In order for a human child to survive, you need to give it much more care and much more attention than in order for a kitten to survive and to grow up. Usually, a single mother cannot give to her baby enough care and attention only by herself in order that it survives and grows up and reaches maturity. There is a saying, a famous saying, that it takes an entire tribe to raise a human. You need help from a lot of people in order to raise your child. And this is why humans evolved very strong social ties with one another. Evolutionary pressures, natural selection, favored humans who are capable of forming strong social ties and living in tribes, because this is essential for taking care of the babies. A grown-up can survive by himself or herself. It's not easy, but it's possible, but they won't have children. If you have children, the only way that you can take care of them until they are old is if you have assistance from other humans, and therefore humans live in tribes or in groups. So this is the first big impact of the fact that humans are born underdeveloped, half-baked. The second important impact is that humans can be educated and humans can be socialized to a far greater extent, to a far greater degree than any other animal. Most mammals emerge from the womb of their mothers like some porcelain vase emerging from a kiln. It's ready. And if you now try to change the shape of this porcelain vase, then you will only scratch it or break it. In contrast, humans emerge from the womb of their mothers like a molten glass emerging from a furnace. It's still very liquid, somewhere between liquid and solid. So you can take it and you can spin it and stretch it and shape it into all kinds of shapes. So this is what's happening with humans. You can, after they are born, you can educate them and you can socialize them in various ways. And this is why today we can educate our children to become Christians or Buddhists, capitalists or socialists, warlike or peace-loving. It's all because our brains, we emerge from the womb with half-baked bodies and brains, and you can still play with us to a large extent. So this is another important characteristics of humans, that they can be educated and socialized more than almost any other animal. We tend to assume that having a large brain, being able to produce and use tools, having complex societies are huge advantages. And it is obvious why humans that possess all these advantages became the most powerful and most important animals on Earth. But the surprising and important fact is that humans enjoyed all these advantages, big brains, tools, complex societies, for more than 2 million years. And during these years, they remained weak and marginal creatures, without much impact on the environment. Counting all humans together all over the world, from Indonesia to Britain, there were less than 1 million humans, about, say, 1 million years ago. And they were not the top predators of the ecosystem. They were not top dogs. Actually, they were preyed upon. They were hunted by bigger animals, such as lions and bears and alligators. Humans themselves were not very good hunters. They were rarely able to hunt by themselves big animals like giraffes or elephants. Most humans subsisted by eating vegetable foods like nuts and fruits and mushrooms and things like that, by hunting small animals like rabbits and frogs and turtles, and also by eating the leftovers of other animals. Like a lion would come and hunt a giraffe, and humans will come later on as scavengers and eat whatever is left. One of the most common uses of early stone tools was actually not to hunt animals, but to crack open the bones of dead animals in order to get the marrow. The marrow is the black stuff inside bones. So this is one of the things that ancient humans probably ate. Actually, some researchers believe that eating marrow was the original niche, the original speciality of humans in the world. Every animal, I mean many animals, have a special niche in nature. For example, woodpeckers. This is a kind of bird which has a strong and sophisticated beak, which enables woodpeckers to peck inside wood, to make holes in tree trunks and pull out all kinds of termites and worms and insects that live inside the wood and eat them. And this is the niche, this is the speciality of woodpeckers. So just as woodpeckers had this speciality, ancient humans had their speciality in nature, which was to eat marrow, to eat the marrow inside bones. Why marrow? Well, imagine that you're a human 1 million years ago, and you see a lion take down a big giraffe. Now, this is very tempting to try and eat something from a giraffe steak, but you don't want to go anywhere near a hungry lion, because he may eat you as well as the giraffe. So you stay away. You hide and you watch the lion eating the giraffe, but you stay away. And eventually the lion had his fill and goes away. It's a big giraffe. There was still something to eat. But you don't dare to approach the giraffe yourself, because now is the time of the bigger scavengers, like the hyenas and the wolves. Now it's their turn. You don't want to mess with the hyenas. So the hyenas come and eat whatever the lion has left, and you and your friends, you still stay away, hiding and watching carefully. Eventually, the hyenas go away, and the jackals and the wolves, they all go away. And only then, you and your friends approach the carcass of the giraffe, looking left and right all the time very frightfully. Maybe a lion or a hyena is coming. And when you see that nobody is coming, you approach what remains of the giraffe, and you usually find out that there is nothing left to eat, because the lion and the hyenas and the wolves, they just finished everything. The only thing that is still left to eat from this giraffe is the marrow inside the bones, because in big bones, neither lions, nor hyenas, nor jackals, they don't have the force in their jaws and in their teeth to break open large bones and eat the marrow inside. And now it's your turn, humans. You and your friends, you come, you pick up one of these big giraffe bones, and you take out your big invention, the flint knife, and you take the bone, and you cut it open, and you break it open, and you eat the marrow, and this is your this is what humans are famous for. In the savannah, 1 million years ago, they can break open the bones and eat the marrow. So these are humans 1 million years ago. And it is a key to understanding our history and our psychology, even today, to realize that the position of humans in the food chain for close to 2 million years was somewhere in the middle. We were not top predators. We were somewhere in the middle of the food chain for hundreds of thousands of years. Yes, our ancestors hunted small animals, like these turtles and birds and whatever, but all the time they were being hunted by the large predators, and they were usually unable to hunt big animals by themselves. Only about 400,000 years ago, several species of humans, like Neanderthals, began to hunt large animals on a regular basis, and only in the last 100,000 years, with the rise of our species, Homo sapiens, only then, in the last 100,000 years, did humans jump from the middle to the top of the food chain and became top predators of planet Earth. This spectacular leap from the middle to the top of the food chain had enormous consequences. Not only in what people could eat and do, but also psychologically and socially. Humans were not used to being at the summit of the food chain, and they're actually ill-adapted for this position. Other animals that are at the top of the food pyramid, like lions and sharks and alligators and bears, they evolved to fill this position of top predators over millions of years. So they're used to it. They know what to do with it. Humankind, on the other hand, ascended to the position of top predator of the planet almost overnight. In evolutionary terms, it took us almost no time to jump from the middle to the top of the food chain, and it was not enough time for humans to adapt themselves to this new position. Many historical calamities, many things about the way that humans behave towards others and toward the environment, from the deadly wars between humans to the ways that people treat the ecosystem around them, many of these things result from this over-hasty jump, that we now feel a position in the ecosystem which is completely different from the position of our ancestors until a very short time ago, and we are just not used to it and not well adapted to it. Sometimes we think about ourselves, humankind, as a pack of wolves that somehow got hold of tanks and atom bombs. This is wrong. It is better to think about ourselves as a herd of sheep who, due to some evolutionary accident, learned how to make and use tanks and atom bombs. And armed sheep are far more dangerous than armed wolves, because they are not used to it, and they don't know what to do, how to behave in a position of power. Wolves know what to do with power. Sheep and humans know far less what to do with power. How exactly did we make this sudden jump from the middle to the top of the food chain? We will begin exploring this question in the next segment of this lesson. In the previous segment, we saw that humankind, for most of its existence, had large brains, had the ability to produce and use tools, had complex social structures, but remained weak and marginal in the ecosystem. Eventually, however, human beings, at least in the last 100,000 years, ascended to the top of the food chain and became the most powerful animals around. How did they make this jump? Perhaps the first significant step on the way to the top was the domestication of fire. We don't know exactly when, where, and how humans did this to domesticate fire. But we do know from archaeological evidence that by about 300,000 years ago, some humans, like Neanderthals and later Homo sapiens, were using fire on a daily basis. Fire had important advantages to offer humans. It gave humans a source of light in darkness and a source of warmth in winter when it's cold. Fire also gave our ancestors the first really effective weapon against dangerous animals like lions and bears. Fire could also be used to start changing the environment to fit our, not our, but our ancestors' needs, the needs of humans hundreds of thousands of years ago. People, for example, could use fire to burn down forests. And once the forest and once the flames died down, then humans could walk in and collect all kinds of dead animals that were caught in the fire and eat them. So it was an easy meal. You just burn down a forest and you come and collect a lot of food, which you can now eat. So this was another important advantage of fire. But the most important thing that fire did, the best thing about fire, was that it enabled humans to cook. We don't often think about cooking as one of the big steps forward in the history of humankind, but cooking was of immense importance. First of all, cooking opened entire new sections in the supermarket of nature before humankind. I mean that all kinds of foods that exist in nature but that humans cannot digest, cannot eat without cooking them, such as wheat and rice and potatoes. Once humans had control of fire, they could start eating these foods. You cannot go around and just pick, say, wheat and eat it, because you can't digest wheat in its natural form. And similarly, you cannot dig potatoes in the ground and just eat them. A cow can do it. A pig can do it, because they have a digestive system that can digest wheat and potatoes and rice. But humans can't. Until they had fire to do much of the job for them. Once you cook potatoes, or once you make wheat, you can eat it and enjoy the calories and the vitamins that it can give you. So this was a big advantage of fire. People could start eating many new things. Another advantage was that cooking kills germs and parasites that infest food, especially in meat, but also in other kinds of food. So once humans began to cook their food, it protected them against all kinds of health dangers and against all kinds of parasites that otherwise may enter their body and live there and kill them. Another big advantage of of cooking, is that it reduced the time that humans have to invest in chewing their food and the time and energy needed to digest food. Food, when it comes raw, uncooked, you have to chew it for a long time, and then it takes the stomach and the guts a long time and a lot of energy to digest them properly. Our cousins, the chimpanzees, they spend an average of 5 hours each day just chewing and chewing food in order to make it easier for the stomach. For people who use fire in order to cook their food, 1 hour a day is sufficient, and they need to expend much less energy to digest the food. So basically what cooking enables people to do is to outsource much of the digestion to fire. We don't have to do it ourselves. Much of our digestion is actually done by fire. This means that humans, in contrast, for example, to chimpanzees, they can survive with smaller teeth, with less powerful jaws, and with shorter intestines. When you eat cooked food, you don't need very big teeth and very powerful jaws and very long intestines, because you don't need to invest so much effort in chewing and digesting. Actually, there are scholars who believe that there is a direct link between the beginning of cooking, the shortening of the human intestines, and the growth of the human brain. And why do they claim this? Well, one of the interesting things about the energy economy of the body, of the human body, is that the two greatest consumers of energy in the body are the brain and the digestive systems, the stomach and the intestines. This is why it's quite difficult to have both very long intestines and a large brain at the same time, because they compete for the limited energy of the body. Once you shorten the intestines, you don't need so much intestines to digest your food, you can now open the way for a really big brain. And there is evidence that the big jump, we discussed earlier the growth of the human brain, and we said that it began already 2.5 million years ago. But the really big jump in the size of human brains came only in the last 300 or 400,000 years, with the appearance of species like the Neanderthals and Homo sapiens with giant brains. And this is exactly the time that people began to cook. So some scholars say that there is a direct link, that once you cooked your food, your intestines became shorter, and then your brain really got big. So this is a very big advantage that fire and cooking gave to humans. And this is why, again, many scholars, many scientists say that the first really significant gulf between men and all the other animals was the domestication of fire. The power of almost all the other animals in nature depend upon their body. There is a direct link between what kind of the force, the power of your body, and the power of the animal. The power of the animal depends on the strength of the muscles, on the size of the teeth, on the breadth of the wings in case of birds. So there is a link here between the body and the power of the animal. Now, it is true that some animals can use natural forces to increase their power. For instance, animals can harness the power of water currents or the power of winds. But even when animals do that, there is still a very close connection to the abilities, to the physical abilities of their bodies. Eagles, for example, they can use their power relies not only directly on their bodies, but also on identifying winds and thermal columns, columns of hot air that eagles use in order to fly. Eagles are able to identify a place where there are currents of hot air coming up, and then they spread their wings and they allow the hot air to carry them upwards. But eagles cannot decide, they cannot control the location of these hot air columns, and even when they use the winds and the hot air, their maximum carrying capacity, their maximum power is still proportional to their wingspan. Even if an eagle locates a very, very powerful column of hot air, it's not enough to be able to lift an elephant, because the eagle's wingspan is simply not big enough. So this is what I meant when I said that the power of animals is always directly dependent on the power of their bodies, on the size and shape of their bodies. When humans domesticated fire, it broke the link between the power of the animal and the size and power of the body of the animal. Because when humans domesticated fire, they gained control of an obedient force and also of a potentially limitless force, a force without limits. Unlike eagles, humans can choose when and where to ignite a fire. It's up to them to decide that. More importantly, the power of fire is not limited by the power of the body of the human who ignited it, or by the form, or by the strength of the muscles, or anything like that. A single woman which carries a torch or a flint can burn down an entire forest in a matter of hours, an entire forest with thousands of trees and thousands of animals and birds and so forth. She can burn it down by herself. It's not like the eagle, that even when it can use the wind, it is still limited by the size of the wings. In the case of a woman burning down an entire forest, there is absolutely no proportion between the power of her body and her power as a master of fire that can burn down the whole forest. So the domestication of fire in this respect was a sign of things to come. The domestication of fire was, in a way, the first important step on the way to the atomic bomb. And fire made humans more different from all the other animals and more powerful. However, it should be emphasized that even after the domestication of fire, humans were still not the most important animal in the world. They were still not the most powerful animal in the world. The real jump to the top of the food chain had to wait a few 100,000 years more to the appearance and the spread and the triumphs of our species, Homo sapiens. And the appearance and spread of our species of Homo sapiens will be the subject of the next segment. In the previous segment, we discussed how humans domesticated fire and thereby began to become more and more powerful. At that stage, however, there are still many species of humans on planet Earth, and though fire made them more powerful and more important than before, they still remained relatively insignificant animals with little impact upon the ecosystem. The real revolution in the status of humans came only after the appearance of our own species, Homo sapiens. Our species evolved in East Africa sometime between 300,000 years ago and 200,000 years ago. The exact date is not known for sure, and scholars have endless argument about it in books and articles and conferences, so they don't really agree whether the first animal that can be called Homo sapiens, whether it appeared around 300,000 years ago or 200,000 years ago. But almost all scholars agree that by 150,000 years ago, East Africa was populated by Homo sapiens that looked basically exactly like you and me. Scholars also agree that around 70,000 years ago, some of these sapiens left East Africa and reached the Middle East. And from the Middle East, they quickly spread all over the Eurasian landmass. The Eurasian landmass includes Europe and Asia together. When Homo sapiens arrived in the Middle East, most of Eurasia was already populated by other humans, by the Neanderthals and Homo erectus and Homo soloensis and so forth. What happened to them? This is one of history's biggest and most important questions. What happened to all the other human species? Well, there are two conflicting theories. One theory is called the interbreeding theory. It tells about interbreeding between sapiens and the other species. It argues that as sapiens spread around the world, they bred with other human species, and that people today are the result of this interbreeding. For example, when sapiens reached the Middle East and Europe, they encountered a local population of Neanderthals. Neanderthals, which we discussed earlier, they were humans that were more muscular and better adapted to the cold climates of Europe and the Middle East than sapiens. Neanderthals also had bigger brains than the brains of sapiens. They used tools, they used fire, and they were quite good at hunting all kinds of animals. How did Neanderthals look like? Well, you've probably all seen a caricature of Neanderthals, because caricaturists like Neanderthals very much. They usually depict them as brute and stupid cavemen. But according to the best evidence we have today, Neanderthals may actually have looked like this image that you can now see. This is a speculative reconstruction, but it is based on the remains of a real Neanderthal child whose remains archaeologists have discovered. There is also genetic evidence that at least some of the Neanderthals had fair skin and fair hair. So this is actually a better image of how Neanderthals look like than the usual caricature. According to the interbreeding theory, when Homo sapiens spread into Neanderthal lands in the Middle East and Europe, what happened was that the sapiens and Neanderthals bred, and the two populations basically merged to form a single population. If this is indeed the case, this means that Europeans and Middle Eastern people are not pure sapiens, but they are in fact a mixture of sapiens and Neanderthals. Similarly, according to the interbreeding theory, when sapiens reached China about 60,000 years ago, they met and bred there with the local population of Homo erectus and Homo denisova, and merged with them, so that Chinese and people in East Asia in general are also not pure sapiens, but a mixture of sapiens and erectus. The only people who are really pure sapiens may be Africans. So this is one theory, the interbreeding theory. The opposite view is called the replacement theory. And the replacement theory tells a very different story. It tells a story of incompatibility, of revulsion, and perhaps even of genocide. According to the replacement theory, there was no sex between sapiens and other human species like the Neanderthals or the Erectus. Sapiens and Neanderthals had different anatomies. They most likely had different mating habits. They may even have different body odors. And in any case, they had very little sexual interest in having sex with somebody from the other population, from the other species. Even if some Neanderthal Romeo met and fell in love with a sapiens Juliet, and they even had children together, then these children were infertile, according to the replacement theory. Just as donkeys and horses may mate, but they can produce only infertile mules, so a Neanderthal Romeo and a sapiens Juliet could produce only infertile crossbreeds. The two populations, according to the replacement theory, the two populations of sapiens and Neanderthals therefore remained completely distinct, the one from the other, and when the Neanderthals died out, their genes died with them. They were an evolutionary dead end. According to this view, sapiens replaced the other human populations in the world without merging with them. And if this is the case, this means that all living humans today, not just Africans, are pure sapiens. All living humans today share exactly the same ancestors, exactly the same great-great-great-grandmothers and grandfathers who lived only in East Africa about 70,000 years ago. So these are the two main theories. And the debate between these two theories is not only an academic debate, it also has very important political implications. From an evolutionary perspective, 70,000 years is a relatively short time. It is not enough time for important genetic changes to accumulate and to occur. So if the replacement theory is correct, and all humans today are the descendants of the same African ancestors from about 70,000 years ago, it means that all living humans today have roughly the same DNA, the same genetic baggage, and the same qualities that result from this genetic baggage. Racial distinctions between Africans and Europeans and Chinese and Aboriginal Australians, and therefore the differences between them are negligible if the replacement theory is correct. But if the interbreeding theory is correct, there might well be genetic differences between Africans, Europeans, Asians, and Aboriginal Australians that go back hundreds of thousands of years. For example, Chinese might have unique Erectus genes that Europeans and Africans don't have. Europeans might have unique Neanderthal genes that evolved for hundreds of thousands of years and that Chinese and Africans don't have. If this is true, it means that there might be significant differences between different populations of humans today, differences not only in physical qualities, but also in mental and psychological qualities, and this is obviously political dynamite. It's a very, very problematic notion that there might be these deep genetic differences between different populations of humans today. In recent decades, the replacement theory was the common wisdom in the field. First of all, because it had firmer archaeological backing, but also because it was more politically correct. The idea that there are deep genetic differences between different human populations is so frightening that people and scientists didn't want to go there, so they preferred the replacement theory. But this ended in about 3 years ago, in 2010, when the results of a 4-year effort to map the Neanderthal genome were published. Over the last decade or so, geneticists were able to collect enough intact Neanderthal DNA from all kinds of fossilized bones in order to map the entire Neanderthal genome. They took DNA from Neanderthal bones from this cave and from that cave and mapped the DNA. And today we have an entire map of the Neanderthal genome. And then what scientists did was to take this Neanderthal genome and compare it with the genomes, the DNA of people living nowadays. And the results stunned the academic community. It turned out that about 4% of the unique human genes of modern people in the Middle East and Europe are actually Neanderthal genes. Now, 4% is not a huge amount, but it's not zero either. If this was not enough, then after a few months, a second shockwave came over the academic community when DNA extracted from the fossilized finger bone from the Denisova cave showed that up to 6% of the unique human genes of modern Melanesians and Aboriginal Australians are actually Denisovan genes. If these results are valid, and it's very important to keep in mind, these are very new results, and all the time there is more evidence and more research being done, so we should be careful about jumping to conclusions. But still, if these results are valid, it means that there were at least some sexual encounters between sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans that resulted in the birth of fertile offspring, as that there are people today whose great-great-grandmothers and grandfathers were Neanderthals and Denisovans, and maybe other human species also. So the interbreeding theory has at least some truth in it. That doesn't mean, however, that the replacement theory is completely wrong. Since Neanderthals and Denisovans, even according to these new findings, they contributed only a very small percentage of our modern DNA, only 4% to 6%, it is impossible to speak about a real merger between sapiens and other species. If there was actual merger between the populations, like Europeans were a merger of Neanderthals and sapiens, we should have seen 40%, 50% Neanderthal genes, and not 4%. So it seems that although the differences between sapiens and Neanderthals were not large enough to completely prevent fertile intercourse, they were still sufficient to make such fertile sexual contacts pretty rare. The populations, the ancient populations of sapiens and Neanderthals, they may have intermingled to a certain extent, but they did not merge. They remained distinct populations, distinct groups. Now, if this is the case, how should we actually understand the biological relations between sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans? Were they distinct species, or were they just different populations of the same species, different races of the same species? Now, given the new evidence, it is quite clear that sapiens and Neanderthals were not completely different species like horses and donkeys, because obviously we saw that they could have had fertile sexual intercourse. On the other hand, it would also be a mistake to view them as simply different populations of the same species, like bulldogs and spaniels. The truth is that biological reality is not black and white. It's complex. There are important gray areas in the way that we catalog and classify animals. The thing is, what you need to understand is that every two species that evolved from a common ancestor, such as horses and donkeys, were at one time just two populations of the same species, like bulldogs and spaniels. That with time, the two populations became more and more different from each other. More and more genetic mutations in the one remained just in this population and were not shared with the other population. So they became more and more different until they became completely distinct and went their separate evolutionary ways and became different species. But during this process of two populations becoming more and more and more and more different until they are different species, there must have been a point in time when the two populations were already quite different from one another, but were still capable, on rare occasions, of having sex and producing fertile offspring. Then another gene or two mutated, changed, and this cut the last connection between the populations, and they became completely distinct. It seems that about 50,000 years ago, sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans were exactly at that borderline point. As we shall see in the next lesson, 50,000 years ago, sapiens were already very different from Neanderthals and from Denisovans, not only in their genetic code and physical traits, but more importantly, they were already different, very different, in their cognitive abilities and in their social abilities. Yet, it was still just possible, on rare occasions, for a sapiens and a Neanderthal to have children together. So the two populations did not merge, but a few Neanderthal genes and a few Denisovan genes did make it onto the sapiens DNA. This is actually a pretty unsettling thought, and some people may say a pretty thrilling thought, that at least at one point in the past, sapiens, just like you and me, could have sex with an animal from a completely different, or from a different species, or from an almost different species, and not only have sex with an animal from a different species, but actually produce and raise children together with an animal from a different species. And it's interesting to think about it because, as we'll see in the last lesson of this course, when we reach the 21st century, we may be returning to that point in time when there are different species in humans in the world, and so the relations between them should be of great interest to us. As we'll see in the last lesson of this course, we might have more than one human species in the world in the next few decades. But going back tens of thousands of years ago, we still have one important question to answer. If the Neanderthals did not simply merge with sapiens, what exactly happened to them? Why did they vanish? One possibility is that Neanderthals became extinct because Homo sapiens outcompeted them. Now, what does it mean, Homo sapiens outcompeted them? Well, imagine that, say, 40,000 years ago, sapiens from the Middle East arrive to a Balkan valley, a valley in Greece or Bulgaria of today, where Neanderthals have been living for countless generations in the past. These newcomers, these sapiens from Africa, they of course have to eat. So they start hunting the local deer, and they start picking the local mushrooms and the nuts and the fruits and so forth, and they eat them. But this is exactly the food that Neanderthals too rely upon in order to survive. So the two species start to compete for the same food resources, for the same deer, for the same turtles, for the same frogs, for the same berries and fruits and nuts and so forth. And if sapiens, as we shall see in the next lesson, were already more sophisticated than Neanderthals in their techniques of hunting and gathering, this means that with time, sapiens had more of the food and ate more and bred, and their population grew. Whereas Neanderthals were left with less and less food, their population dwindled, and eventually they disappeared, except for perhaps for one or two individuals from the Neanderthal band, which somehow managed to join the sapiens band and this is how their genes came to us. So this is one possibility of how the Neanderthals disappeared. Another possibility is that the competition between sapiens and Neanderthal for the same food resources, it was not peaceful and quiet, but it flared up into violence and war and genocide. And this is quite a likely scenario because tolerance is not a sapiens trademark, is not a human trademark. When you think about our species, Homo sapiens, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Intelligent, yes. Sophisticated, yes. Ingenious, yes. But tolerant, no. Not us Homo sapiens. We are not a very tolerant species. In modern times, even a small difference of skin color, of dialect or religion has been enough to prompt one group of sapiens to go about exterminating another group of sapiens. Would ancient sapiens have been more tolerant towards neighbors from a completely different human species? It's unlikely. It may well be, therefore, that when sapiens encountered Neanderthals about 50,000 years ago, the result was the first and the most significant ethnic cleansing campaign in history. Now, we don't know for sure which of these possibilities is correct. And in all likelihood, it didn't happen the same way in all the areas. In some areas, sapiens may have outcompeted the Neanderthals without using any violence. In other areas, they may have used some violence, a little violence, and in still other areas, they may have used a lot of violence, and they actually drove away or exterminated the Neanderthal by force. Whichever way it happened, the Neanderthals disappeared. And their disappearance posed one of history's great what-if questions. What would have happened if things had turned out otherwise? Imagine how things might have looked like if the Neanderthals have survived alongside Homo sapiens. What kind of world, what kind of cultures, societies, and political structures would have emerged in a world where several different human species coexisted side by side? What if, in addition to the differences between Africans and Europeans, between Christians and Muslims, between rich and poor, between men and women, we also had to deal with the difference between sapiens and Neanderthals in our world today? How, for example, would religions have unfolded? Take Christianity. Would Christianity have taught that Jesus died for the sins of all humans, including the Neanderthals, or only for the sins of sapiens? What about heaven and hell? Would heaven and hell have been open to Neanderthals or only to sapiens? If you say were a good Neanderthal, you went to heaven along with the sapiens, and if you were an evil Neanderthal, a naughty Neanderthal, you went to hell alongside the wicked sapiens? Or the monotheist religions such as Christianity would have told us that no, Neanderthals don't have souls, and when they die, they just disappear. Nothing happened to them. What about modern politics? How do politics have developed? Could Neanderthals, for example, get the vote to parliament? Could they form parties? Would the American Declaration of Independence say that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all members of the genus Homo are created equal? Or would it have reserved human rights only for sapiens and not for other human species? Would Karl Marx have urged workers of all species to unite, or only workers of the Homo sapiens species? There is a lot to think about here. This is why the disappearance of the Neanderthals was one of the most important events in history. It changed everything. It changed the way that sapiens understand themselves, their place in the world, and their relations to all the other animals. It changed religion, society, and politics. Over the years, what happened is that Homo sapiens has grown so accustomed to being the only human species around that it's hard for us today even to conceive of any other possibility. The lack of brothers and sisters makes it very easy for us to imagine that we are the epitome of creation and that there is a gap separating us from all the rest of the animal kingdom. When Charles Darwin, in the 19th century, indicated that Homo sapiens was actually just another kind of animal, people were outraged. Even today, many people, even most people around the world, refuse to believe it, that sapiens is just one more kind of animals that evolved maybe in a slightly different way, but still, it's not so different from the other animals. Had the Neanderthals survived alongside us, would we still imagine ourselves to be a very unique creature separated from the rest of the animal kingdom? Perhaps this is exactly why our ancestors wiped out the Neanderthals and the other human species. They were too familiar to us to simply ignore them, but they were too different from us to tolerate their existence. So the solution was to exterminate them. We don't know it for sure. It's just a speculation. What we do know for sure is that whether sapiens are to blame or not, no sooner had sapiens arrived at a particular location on planet Earth than the native population of other human species went extinct. The last remains of Homo soloensis in the island of Java are dated to about 50,000 years ago, just when Homo sapiens arrived at Java. Homo denisova disappeared shortly thereafter, about 40,000 years ago. The Neanderthals disappeared about 30,000 years ago. And the last dwarves vanished from Flores Island about 12,000 years ago. They left behind these various human species. They left behind some bones, some stone tools, a few genes in our DNA, and a lot of unanswered questions. And they also left behind us, Homo sapiens, the last surviving human species. What was the sapiens' secret of success, the secret of success of our particular species? How did we manage to spread and settle so rapidly over the entire planet in all kinds of ecologically different habitats? How did we, Homo sapiens, push all other human species to extinction? How come even the strong Neanderthals who had big brains and were better adapted to the cold climate of Europe and the Middle East, how did even then failed to survive our onslaught? This will be the subject of the next lesson.